Hello, friends. Welcome back to Honoring the Journey. I'm Leslie Neese, your host for yet another wonderful journey that we get to go on together today with my new friend. Her name is Bethany Nass Shea. And here's the cool thing, like, I met her, she interviewed me with her co hosts on This Is Not Church podcast. And she is one of those people, and I know you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. When you meet them, you're like, I need to know her more. She seems super cool. She seems super like the same heart, like we share a heart, Bethany. It's weird. So
Totally.
I could not wait to get you on my show and just celebrate your journey and just hear all the good things that are going on in your life. Welcome to Honoring the Journey, Bethany.
Thanks, Leslie. It is really fun to be here. And I felt the same thing with you. Like when we were on
Yeah.
that podcast together, I was like, oh, she's kindred. Like there's
Yeah.
something about this woman that is just like, oh, I could hang out with her anywhere at any
Yeah.
time and never
Totally.
feel judged or anything, like just
Mm-mm.
welcomed, included, belonging, all the things. So thank
Oh,
you.
well, that is one of the biggest compliments I think you could ever give me. So thank you. That's what I want. I want
Yeah.
to be a safe place. People
Yeah.
need safety anymore, especially in the world today. It's just so unsafe feeling, and to
Totally.
just be able to offer a space like that, and I feel that with you. I was even like
Mm.
kind of looking at your website and into your books and things like that before the interview, and I was like, golly. I mean, just the way you write things, it's just like, wow, she totally gets it. I'm
Mm.
so happy to have you here. And you're also, and this is kind of cool. I love when I have a pastor on the show. I just had
Yeah.
Ben Kramer. I've had a couple of other pastors
Nice.
who are just, oh, it's like it gives me hope
Yeah. Yeah.
for the
Totally.
church. Not that I've had, I mean, like, some of my pastors have been amazing, and as a matter of fact, I will say, when I guess, came out of the closet as a deconstructioner, um,
Mm.
he was the first person to reach out to me, one of my old pastors, and say,
Wow.
"If I've done anything to hurt you, I just want to apologize." And I was like, "Okay, so you're, like, the one who didn't, like, so obviously, you wouldn't be reaching out if you weren't this amazing human." So I know there are really good pastors
Yeah.
in the church, and it can get a little tempting, I think, in the deconstruction community to sort of villainize all of them. So that's why I'm very intentional about making sure that I have some pastors in here, just like expressing like their thoughts, how they see Jesus, how they preach, and what it's like to actually be sort of more on a, I don't know, the love train.
Well, and it's really hard for pastors sometimes to be
Yeah.
honest about their own struggles and their own questions because they have to live into some sort of a box that, I mean, like
Mm,
a glass box in some ways that if they push against the dominant narrative too much, then they could lose some of their funding. Different
yes.
parishioners might leave with their money. They could get in trouble with their denomination. There's so many different things that keep pastors having to stay in line, and they can't take
Well, and
risks in
on
the same
edge.
way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Totally, totally.
in a very, my way, I guess you could say, I kind of understand that, having worked in
Mm,
Christian radio. Like,
right.
the funding depended on the words that came out of our mouth or the words that didn't come out of our mouth.
Yep.
And there was a lot of stress. It was tough, and it was hard to make sure, you say it in the right way and don't
Yeah.
offend people. And I mean, it's a game, it's a dance, is what it felt
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. Like you can't fully be
So,
yourself and fully be honest. And that's really hard.
yeah.
Yeah.
That is really hard. So, like,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about you and what
Okay.
you do as a pastor and how that even came about. How did you become a
Sure.
pastor, Bethany?
Thanks for asking. So I was raised in a very conservative Baptist church where women didn't even pray from the front, or the only
Mm,
thing that women could do in a form of leadership besides children's ministry was they could be deaconesses, meaning that they could pass out the communion elements or pass the offering plate around, but that was about it.
wow.
And so, yeah, and so I really grew up believing that women were never not only not allowed to be in a space of leadership in a church, but actually I was very much against it. I felt like it was wrong. Um, my personality is one where I'm an Enneagram 9. I don't like to rock the boat. I want everybody to be at peace. And so even
Mm,
questioning that narrative in my life felt like an act of rebellion. Like it would create
mm,
a space of unrest in my soul. And so it was best just to avoid even that question coming up. And so after I got married, I moved into married student housing with my husband at a Assemblies of God college called Vanguard University in Southern California. And we were living next door to some friends, new friends of ours. And she was training and studying to be a pastor. Um,
Oh, and
yes.
that felt
Yeah.
weird to you, didn't it?
It felt so weird. And I think I was kind of open to that being her journey, but very much against that being anybody else's journey or even wanting to support somebody's journey in that way.
Or even
So,
wondering if
yeah,
they were, I mean, I remember when women would be pastors when I was deep in evangelicalism. It's like, I wonder if they're even really Christians because they're not really following the Bible.
totally,
I mean,
totally.
I hate that I did that, but I did. I mean, let's be real. Yeah.
Same.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah. So I remember thinking I would never go to a church with a female pastor. I would never
Mhm.
want to attend a church like that or be involved in any kind of church like that. Um, and then my husband and I moved up to Humboldt County, which is about 5.5 hours north of San Francisco, to help start a church, a non-denominational church up here. And um, and I was the very supportive wife. Like my whole idea of male headship was securely intact. Um, my idea of like being the supportive wife, the stay-at-home mom, all the things, homeschool parent. I was 100% in on all of that. Not to say that those things are bad, but that was just my own. That was the
Yeah.
lens I was seeing through, and I couldn't see outside of that lens.
Mm.
And the people that we planted the church with, uh, his name was Dan, and Dan had this vision for multiple voices being in the church, and he asked me to teach one Sunday shortly after we got started, actually. And um, and I prepared a message. I was going to share my heart, is how I justified it instead of preaching. I was like, I'm just sharing my heart, and I've
Yeah.
got my
And
husband.
my
My
husband will
husband's
be there.
yeah,
He'll be my
he's
covering.
covering
Yes,
exactly.
yes, yes.
Yep,
Obviously.
yep.
Yeah.
All the ways to make it happen and be okay with it and make sure that God was never displeased.
And not
Um,
lead the men astray, you
Totally.
Jezebel. Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Oh gosh,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Mhm.
So I shared my heart, my first message, and I walked off the behind the podium afterwards, and I thought, this is what I'm meant to do. Like I love this so much. And I thought, is this something that God is calling me to? And would God call me to something that He would never affirm in my life? Is this
Mm,
even something that's available? And I just wrestled with it for years. Like
mm.
I would teach messages and prepare sermons and just teach like maybe quarterly for like 3 years or so. I was doing quarterly and loving it every single time, and really like having to do a lot of study. And I was reading
Mm.
this book by oh gosh, I don't want to say horrible, but they're very conservative writers,
Mm.
named, I can't remember. They're the Pearls. Debbie Pearl is her name, and it was a
Okay.
book called "Created to Be His Helpmeet." So already the language was a little bit scary.
Yikes,
I know,
okay.
I know. And I'm reading this book, and I'm getting more and more frustrated. Like, Jason, what is going on? You are not leading our family right. Like, I don't even know what to do with you. I'm like laying in bed and handing him this book, all fuming, like he hasn't been
Mhm.
doing the work that God has called him to. And he reads it and he goes, "Oh, babe, this is really bad theology." And I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "This is terrible. You're reading this?" And I was like, "Yeah, are you going to teach me something?" Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
"Please teach me,"
"Oh,
as my
please
husband.
teach me, leader."
And after that, it's like I started to deconstruct everything. Like
Mm.
everything that I was handed, all the things that the mold I was trying my best to fit into, while also recognizing I wanted to expand into the church a little bit more in leadership and how to fit all these different ways. I almost felt like for a long time I was code switching in
Mm.
like evangelical Christian circles, and I could really fit in well with that. And then in this deconstruction mode that I was um, quickly stepping into. So
So you were
yeah,
bilingual.
I felt very bilingual.
That's what it feels like to me. It does.
Totally.
I'm like, it's a completely different language,
Yeah,
and you
right?
know
I
exactly
know.
what that means, and you know exactly what that means, and you're just trying to find which language feels more like your native tongue, you know?
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. So shortly thereafter, the pastor that we started the church with left our church and moved to Southern California with his wife. And there was like just a lot of turmoil that was happening at our church. People were leaving left and right. He had done like a lot of deconstruction on his own, which was excellent, and everybody was hungry for it. And he was the main teaching pastor. And then he got down to the bottom of it all and couldn't build anything back up and had left his faith fully and kind of left everybody like, well, what's next? So my
Mm.
husband and I just felt like we were holding on to this church, not sure what to do next. Um, and we were meeting with our leadership team. And I had, by that point, I had been teaching about 3 Sundays a month. And the leadership team said, it's time for you to be a pastor, Bethany. And I said, oh, I don't need that. I don't need that title. I actually don't like titles. I feel like it separates us from each other. And that's not something I need. And they're like, yeah, it's fine. You don't need it. Other people need you to need this. And so you're just going to need to be a pastor now. And I'm like, fine. So they licensed me as a pastor of this non-denominational church. And then about 4 years later, I went to seminary and got my Master's of Divinity from Claremont School of Theology, and also became a United Methodist pastor in the process. So
Oh, wow.
my husband and I pastor two churches: the non-denominational church called Catalyst in Humboldt, and then a United Methodist church in Arcata as well. So
Wow,
that's
that's a
that's what we
lot.
do.
But you
Yeah.
do it together, so that's kinda
We do it
nice.
together.
You're like a
Yeah,
team. That's
totally,
wonderful.
totally. Yeah, and I love it. I feel like there's nothing else I'd rather do than be able to pastor people, and we have 3 kids, and, we're adoptive parents, and all
Mm,
the trauma and turmoil and joy that comes along with that. They're all teenagers at this point, and,
mhm.
yeah, that's kinda who we are,
I
who I
love it.
am.
Well, I'm curious about something because you said something that really jumped out to me about
Yeah,
the pastor who, basically reached the end of deconstruction and could not rebuild. Like,
yes.
sometimes that happens in deconstruction, and
Yep,
I'm fully aware of exactly why. I think there can be a lot of trauma,
mhm.
for some people. What would you say to somebody who's afraid of that? Who's afraid that they're gonna come to the end and not be able to figure out how to rebuild it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the thing that we need more than anything is empathy and willing
Yeah,
to listen, because and being curious with each other, I think, is a really important thing as well. Like, where is that fear coming from? What is the fear at the end
yeah.
that you are envisioning, and why do you think that fear lives in your body? Like, are you afraid of losing people, like friends, family? Are you afraid of losing your identity and who you are? Are you afraid of losing a job? A lot of times it can happen with pastors, and then what do they do from that point forward for a career? And all of those fears are totally legit. They're not markers of faithlessness or a marker
Right.
of not trusting God or trusting themselves. I think it's just part of what it means to be human. Um,
Mm,
but I, for myself, and so for somebody who would be similar to me in that place of like, I, I had no other option but to deconstruct. I couldn't continue
mm,
forth in the ways of belief and trust in God in the way that it was handed to me in the past. And I feel like my whole life of Christian faith from 18 years old and on, even maybe even before that, has been its own form of deconstruction where answers are harder to come by. Um, and actually, I don't even want answers that often anymore. I just would rather sit in the questions and in the discomfort. Um, but yeah, the fear is there. And when you get down to the bottom, I don't know. Like, I believe personally, I believe that there is no bottom. That when we
yeah.
get down to the bottom, we just get to go a different direction, whether it's, horizontal now, or whether we go back up, or whether we go a little bit deeper. I think that all of it is just part of the adventure of what it means to be human and to be people that are spiritual. And every human is a spiritual being. And so I think the problem with the idea of deconstruction being scary is that people believe that they will get to the bottom and then it's over. And
Right.
I don't think that that's the case. I think the minute we believe it's over is that's where the problem is, because
Yeah.
then we're no longer growing and expanding and
Mhm.
discovering more. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think there was a moment in my deconstruction where I was like, I don't know if I can rebuild, you
Yeah.
know? I don't know if this is something I can do. And rather than like panic and fight that or lean into it and say, this is who I am now, I just kind of let it ride.
Mm,
Um, because inside of me, there was something that was like, I don't know. I looked at my relationship with God and I'm like, even if I said, God, I don't believe in you, even
mhm.
if I said that, even and I tried, I think a lot of people try that and they're like, let's
Yeah.
see what that feels like. I didn't love it. But if somebody else tries that and that makes them feel safe, I don't think God is like, that person doesn't believe in me. That person
No.
doesn't believe in me anymore. Because think about it. I mean, just because you don't believe something is true doesn't mean that it's not. And the way I look at it, my kids could say, I don't really believe you're my mom. And I would say to them, you can believe whatever you want, but like, I am.
It doesn't make it any more true.
I mean, I am your
Yeah.
mom, and
Yeah.
you can believe whatever you want. It doesn't because it doesn't make me feel insecure because I know the truth. So we don't
Totally.
hurt God by not believing.
No.
If anything, some of us who like that connection, it hurts us, and if it's not hurting you, if it makes you feel safer because maybe of trauma in the past or whatever, trust the process. That's kind of what
Yeah.
I try to tell people is just like don't force anything.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of deconstruction is learning how to just wake up and like you said, be curious and let things come as they do
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
fighting through it.
Yeah. Totally. And I mean, they have lost people they love along the way.
Mhm.
I mean, so many
Yeah.
people who have deconstructed or even just left the church. Um, Man, that the amount of loss that they've experienced within that is insurmountable and it's
Mhm.
overwhelming. And so I can understand why people would be afraid of even taking that step forward of deconstructing. Some people don't need to deconstruct. That's just like
Right.
they're just happy go lucky and they have it figured out and I mean the Bible talks about faith is actually a gift and some people are just gifted with that more than others. And it doesn't mean
Right.
that the people who aren't gifted with faith are lacking in some way or
Mm-mm.
not as faithful in with Christ, but just some people are better at that than others, and that's no big deal. But I think what
Right.
you're saying is so true. God's faith in us, God's belief in us,
Mhm.
God's faith in God's self even
Mhm.
is enough. And
Yeah.
regardless of what I believe, how I believe, um, it's not like God's like, "Oh gosh, you're getting it wrong.
Yeah.
You're just such a loser. I can't believe look at this, you're leading people astray. No one will believe the right things now." Like I don't think God is like that at all. I think God's just like,
No.
"Yeah, no one gets it, but let's just keep continuing in love and we'll
Right.
figure it out as we go." And I just love you so
Ugh.
much, you know? It's just
Girl,
yeah.
preach. Preach, preacher.
I will. I will.
No, I love it. It's so true. We just need to just focus on the one thing. I mean, it's like, what did Jesus say? If we just boil it all down,
Yeah.
love,
Yeah.
love, love. Love the Lord your
Yep.
God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yep.
And when we do that, everything falls into place.
Yeah.
And we don't get distracted by, am I doing it right? I think we all know what love is. I think we all like
Totally.
instinctively, because it's a part of our DNA,
Yep.
we
Yep.
instinctively know what that is. So follow that
Yeah.
and you
Yeah.
just can't go wrong.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
Well, I
But
bet so much in the church has taught us that we will go wrong because we can't trust our guts. We can't trust the love in us. We everything is manipulative. And I don't believe that anymore. I think
mhm,
that God designed us in a way for us to be able to trust what God has already put in our lives.
Yeah.
And I think most of us, obviously there's sociopaths and narcissists and different mental
Yeah.
illnesses, but like I think for the most part, most people have that true north. They have
Mhm.
that form of recognizing if they are off track, if they are manipulating a person or a situation to get what they want. Um, I think most people recognize that in themselves, and then
Yeah.
they can determine whether or not this is actually loving of another
Mhm.
person or just a way to get what they want. And um, I have a on my arm, I have tattooed, "Love is God." And I
Mm.
had mentioned that somewhere on social media, and somebody reached out to me and they were like, I just that can't be right. And I was like,
Mhm.
how is it not? Like we if it's love, it's God. I mean, we God doesn't just exist in some sort of church setting or in this doctrinal statement.
Mm.
God exists in this overabundance of love. And where love is, God is.
Mm. I love that, and it's so, so true. I do think, there are a lot of people, especially people who are going through deconstruction and especially in the early phases where they're having to like ask the hard questions. And
Yeah.
one of those questions, and I'm just going to ask you your opinion because you said
Mhm.
you don't believe that anymore, that our heart can't be trusted, our guts can't
Mm.
be trusted, you know. So what helped you to come out of that belief?
Oh, I don't even know. I think it's just been a journey along the way
Mm.
of being able to see. I think a lot of it is to study human nature in general, like to study psychology and then also sociology and why human beings as individuals choose the way they choose, and then why how people groups actually affect those choices and can determine the choices for an individual person. Um, but I think when it comes to the core of a person's being, if you believe in the Imago Dei, that every human has been created in the image of God, that we have the divine imprint within us, then that divine imprint, I believe, has more strength and power than any other outside source
Mm.
that could determine one way or another. And I think when we tap into that, something powerful can happen.
Mm.
But I think even if we don't tap into it, I believe that that influence is still there as the most important aspect of what it means to be human, that sense that every human has been created with that divine imprint. And if we
Well,
have that in us, then there's an opportunity
yeah.
to choose that way forward of love, to trust what God has done.
The thing I think that has been such a, I don't know, mind-blowing realization for me was how religion basically told me that I wasn't connected to the divine,
Yes,
that I needed
totally.
to take steps to become connected to the divine. And it was the steps that they told me, this is what the Bible means when it says this. And this is, and so basically, it's just weird to me because, what was I listening to the other day? I don't remember. I listen to so many things and I'm like, I love information. But they were saying they tell you you have to ask Jesus into your heart in order to be saved, in order to be redeemed. But like, do you have to ask Satan into your heart to not be? Well, like,
Mm,
why the big, it's like, why do we have to make this conscious decision to do something when we didn't make a conscious decision to do this other thing? And
yeah,
I think coming away from that belief that I am separated from God and that I need to do this, 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 and this in order to be connected to God, um, has freed me to love. I think because
yeah.
I was so concerned about myself. Am I doing it right? Am
Mm,
I feeling connected? I remember a preacher telling me once, every sin is like a brick wall or a
yeah,
wall between you and God. And you're like, "Oh my gosh, can he even hear me? Did I ask the right way?" There was just so much
totally.
fear baked into that, that it was impossible for me to love people the way I wanted to because I was just trying to get through. I was just trying to have God love me. But when you
Yeah,
realize that the divine is in you and not believing that, I think is what distracts us, and keeps us feeling like we're separated. Um,
totally.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
Oh,
and then that's a
absolutely.
really, really hard thing, I think, as a pastor. Like, how do you what is salvation? Let me just ask you, like, what is salvation? Because I
Yeah.
do think it is different than what we've been taught in, in indoctrination.
Yeah. Well, I think as Christians, being raised in a regular Christian setting, I suppose, salvation has always been a formula that we have to follow, that
Yes.
A plus B equals C. And if you
Mhm.
say the thing right, if you have the correct words, if you are in the right physical position on your knees or whatever it is, then maybe God will hear you.
Mhm.
And yeah, there is this sense of like separation, the sense of I have to do it all on my own. I am causing the separation between me and God.
Right.
Um, and the only way that I can hear God is if I do the work to make sure to undo that separation. And it's very like works based salvation, even though it doesn't, even though we're preached grace all the time, the words of grace don't actually permeate compared to the formulas and the equations that we were handed of the way that you have to do it, the way that you have to behave, the way that you have to
Mhm.
um, do all these things in order to experience this salvation because God can't do it for you. And I mean, I get like it does, like we have free will. There is a choice that we are supposed to
Yeah.
make as human beings. But what I see through scripture is God always makes the first move. It's
Mhm.
never on us to get to God, it's God always coming to us. And I think if we live in that Genesis 1 and 2 world a little bit more, like the sense of God abiding with humans, walking in the garden, everything being at peace, at wholeness, shalom. I think that that's where we're designed to live. And yet, so often the church has only preached that Genesis 3 reality of separation, of wrath, of curse.
Mhm.
And when we sit in that space, the nice thing, the helpful thing about a Genesis 3 world is it keeps us in fear, and it causes us to need the church, to need the confession, repentance, the all the church type stuff in order to get by. It keeps the hell dominant narrative in the course of our minds because salvation, at least from what I was handed, salvation just meant being saved from hell and into heaven.
Right.
um, which if fear sells so well.
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
Yeah,
it does.
yeah.
And it's hard to get that out of you.
Oh my
It is
gosh,
hard
it's
because
so
you're like,
hard.
if I let go and it's true, then I'm doomed. But then as you're thinking that, you're like, but as a mom, and I love my kids so much, but I'm sure God loves my kids even more than I
Yeah,
love them. And so I'm like, as a mom, there's like literally nothing that they could do, especially just say, I don't believe that.
yeah,
If they
yeah.
said, I don't believe that, that is not a reason to send somebody to eternal conscious torment,
Nope.
burning forever. Like, I would never there's nothing my kids could do
I know.
that would
I
make me
know.
do that. And so but that's what I believed about God for so long was this,
Totally.
he was just ready to pounce me because he was a he.
Yeah, of course.
You
Of
know,
course.
and if I were to say he was a she or could
Oh,
be possibly, like when I read The Shack, I was called a heretic.
of course.
Yeah, I read The Shack and then I had Paul Young on my radio show and interviewed him because it was so impactful to me. Oh my word. I was never allowed to say I like this book ever again from that moment on the radio.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because
Oh, that's
he made God appear as a woman. And he wasn't saying God is a woman. He was saying God is who we need God to be in order
that's
to
right.
meet us where we are.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think that God's ever offended by
No.
any of it. God's just like,
No.
"Yeah, I'm here for you. I just love you so much." I mean, the same way that we are for our kids. Like there's nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, my kids will say things every once in a while that, "You're not my real mom," or all sorts of
Oh,
mean
that's
things
hard.
every once in a while, and yeah, it hurts because I know that they believe that in that moment. Actually, no. I don't even think they believe it. I think they just need to express
They're
their
sad.
own,
They're
yeah,
pain.
their own
Yeah.
sadness, their own
Yeah.
pain. But that doesn't mean like it doesn't destroy me in any way because I already know
Right.
who I am, just like what you were
Right.
saying before.
Yeah.
Like you already know, you're already clear in your identity, and you know that they are loved, and that's the
Hmm.
most important thing. I think when it comes to salvation, coming back to that, um, I didn't know salvation could exist outside of a construct of hell. I really
Hmm.
truly believed
Same.
that, yeah, like what's the point of salvation if we aren't being saved from eternal damnation? The way that I see salvation now, regardless of heaven and hell, obviously, like none of us know what that looks
Yeah,
like, and we can
exactly.
look around us and we can see spaces of heaven around us and we can see spaces of hell around us, just because
True.
people literally live in spaces of hell while they're still alive. But when it comes to being saved from something like that, I just don't have that same construct anymore. I believe that when Christ came to save, he was saving us from ourselves and into a different way of seeing the world, where we get to participate in this shalom, this wholeness, this completeness, this Genesis 1 and 2 immediately, which is saving ourselves, yes, but it's saving everything. Salvation isn't just an
Mm.
individual experience, it is a communal
Yeah.
world experience that we get to then participate in what God has already been doing and always been doing. And being saved means we don't need to live into Genesis 3 any longer. Like that's not the
Mm.
reality. It is actually a lie that we've bought into.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So salvation is a current reality of a future reality too.
For a long time, when we would read in the New Testament about the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven, it was always after this life.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but Jesus said it's here now. It
Yeah.
it's here right now. Like, you can have it right now. And I think, to me, the salvation that Jesus gave us was freedom from systems that tell us we are separated from God. You are not
Totally.
separated from God, and you can do even greater things than me. And I'm just here to show you that it's possible for you to not be in a system and be connected to the divine, and beautiful things happen when you focus on loving people and not
Yep.
judging them. And the harshest words he had were for the Pharisees, the
Yeah.
people who were trying to put these laws and these things on other people. And he was just like, you know, to me, it's so clear now, but at the time, as a matter of fact, I have a relative who is a pastor,
Hmm.
and in the evangelical church, who I know is very concerned with me, you know,
Hmm.
uh, and the people that may follow me, quote unquote, in my quote new religion, unquote. And the truth is, like the other day, there's a lot of passive aggressive posting from my family. They'll post something that I know was for me.
Oh
And
wow.
one of the things they said was, um, it was like, you'll hear people say that these different ways lead to God. But Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except for, and everybody's like, preach. Yeah, yeah, brother. He's the only way to get to heaven. And it took everything in me not to say something.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus was saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life, saying, live your life like this. Believe
Mm-hmm.
that you are connected to God. No one's going to understand that the kingdom of heaven is here right now and you can experience God on earth. Nobody's going to
Right.
understand that if they don't believe that they're even connected to God in the first place, or
That's
if
right.
they feel like they have to do things. That's what Jesus was saying, but like, I can't say that to them because they won't hear it. And I think because they're so afraid, if
Yeah.
I'm wrong, if
Yeah.
I'm wrong, they'll go to hell. And see, to me, I'm like, if there is no fear in perfect love, and perfect love casts out fear, and fear has to do with punishment, then I am not going to have a faith that is based on a fear of my father or my God. I
Yeah.
just don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Sorry, I just
it's like
went on a tangent.
no, no. I think that that's so important because it's pearls before swines with you
Yeah,
with you trying to engage. It's like you're giving them content, beautiful content that they cannot receive and do not want to
right.
receive, and it's not even nourishing for them. They see it as something as rotten.
Yeah,
Whereas I mean, and I'd say it goes both ways. They probably look at what you are expressing in your life and they think, well, all of this, I'm going to keep putting it out there in a passive aggressive way, but it's still pearls before swine, where they
yeah,
believe they have something beautiful that you are unable to digest
See.
as well.
Right.
And it's like, how do we even, I mean, this is like the question I have all the time.
No, I
How do we
love
move
this.
forward?
Yeah.
How do we find unity, lay down our weapons? Because our weapons are so often pointed at each other.
Oh, yeah.
And like, what does commonality look like? But it is so, there are some people that can't get there at this point
Yeah.
in their lives. They can't even have that kind of conversation. Um, and I think a lot of it is like that evangelical savior complex that comes about, that um, we have to be the good soldiers for Jesus, and good soldiers are never willing to lay down their weapons because
Mm.
their whole the whole thing is to defend the
Fight.
faith,
Yeah,
because
fight.
God, apparently God can't be defended on God's self. We
Yeah, I
have to do
know.
it for.
We have
Yeah,
to. We're so big and strong. So big
so
and
big and strong.
strong. Well, it's interesting. When I was writing my book in 2014, it's called Wholehearted. It was one that I wrote when I
Mm,
was deep in evangelicalism.
yeah.
And it was, really, there was so much fear in there. And like, I wish I could just like take it off the shelves at this point. But then I'm like, no, this is part of my journey. This is,
This is
I
honoring
think,
your journey.
yeah, I'm honoring my journey by allowing the
Yeah.
book to still be out there, but,
Mm,
in when I presented it to a specific, he was like like he represented authors, but he was in
okay.
the Christian faith. He read it and he said, "Okay, so there's a few things in here that I'm just not sure that I agree with." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And I put in there about that verse in Matthew 7:21, where Jesus says, "I never knew you.
Mm, depart from
Away
me.
from me, blah, blah, blah."
Mm,
I said, "That's the verse that gets me on the stage. That's the verse that puts me behind a microphone. That's the verse that wakes me up every morning." Because I think the people who are, he's talking to are in the church. And I'm
mm,
like, because they're doing things in the name of Jesus. Like, how
mhm,
in the world, and I was just like so afraid, so afraid. And he said, "I don't think I can represent you
hmm.
because I don't believe that the kingdom is what you think it is." And he tried at that point to explain to me the kingdom. He even sent me a book that I threw away because it was tainted, in my opinion. And
Totally.
I cannot remember the freaking name of that book or the guy, and it's
Huh.
driving me nuts because I think I would love it now. I think I would understand what he was trying to do. But at that
Totally.
point, Bethany, I was ready to fight. I was like,
Yeah.
this guy he's misrepresenting the gospel. I was so mad. I was ready
Mm,
to like, start a thing against him. Um, but I just, I went in a different direction and I kept that message in my book. And now I'm just like, whew. I mean, I know why I did that, and my heart was in the right place, and the motive was always love.
mm, yeah,
And, but it was also fear.
totally. Yeah.
So a
Yeah.
person can change. I guess you asked, how do we do this? Where do we go? I
Yeah.
just think in time, and it's used a lot, I think, in a negative way, the word woke, but it is
Mm,
being awake, Bethany. It's
yeah.
waking up from something and seeing something else. And there have been days where I'm like, man, it'd be so much easier just to go back to believing what I believed.
Oh,
Then I had all the
yep.
answers. I knew everything. I could cross every T, dot every I. I knew everything that there
Yep.
was to know. And I was sure.
Yeah.
It would be so much easier. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. So
Totally.
you just live it maybe. That's what we do. We just
Yeah.
live in love, Bethany.
I know. I know. I know. And it would be so much easier to go back to the having the clear
Yeah.
doctrines, the clear beliefs, having a
Feeling
website for our
sure.
church.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, totally. That just like you could point people to, well, this is what we believe here. This is what we
Yeah.
believe there.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, it feels if that feels real good sometimes,
It
but
does.
it's just not honest. It's not as
Mm-mm.
honest as we can be. I think when it comes to people's experiences of faith and wherever God is leading them, I think the thing that I encourage people into is just to what you were saying, trust the process, but recognize there's no rush. There's no
Mhm.
like end point, got to get
Yeah.
there as fast as possible, need the answers quickly, need to feel settled immediately. I think, when I look at the way that Jesus lived his life, it's like he was in no hurry to get to where he felt he needed to go next. He just allowed it to be what it was and experienced things along the way and was available to people's needs. He was okay with interruptions, um,
Mhm.
and just allowed it to be what it was, not even knowing what the timeline was all of the time. And I think, like, when it comes to your own process, the fact that you got that book in the mail and you threw it away, you weren't
Mhm.
ready. You weren't ready for
Mhm.
it. And maybe, you wish that you could have been ready more rapidly. But the reality is that the pace that you went at is the pace that your heart needed. I always
Mhm.
think of it as like when you go to a movie theater and it's a matinee and you're in that theater for like 2 hours and it's dark, and then you come outside of the theater to get to your car and it's still daylight, and you get blasted with this light. It's just like
Oh,
everything
yeah.
in you is just like, oh my gosh, I need to close my eyes.
I
I need to
can't
go back
see.
inside. I
Yeah,
have a
yeah,
headache. Like, this
yeah.
is too much, too much. And I think that that's how I see it as with deconstruction.
Mhm.
We've been in the dark for so long. We've been
Right.
sleeping for forever. And it's so cozy and comfortable and it feels familiar. But the minute that if we get pushed into the light too fast,
Mm.
oftentimes our response is, I need to go back inside. I need to get under the covers. I need to close
Yeah.
off the lights again. I need to go back to sleep because it's just too scary. So it's
Mhm.
like there needs to be periods of gradual awakening where we can rub the sleep out of our eyes, that we can trust that where we're at this moment, even though it's not fully bright yet, it's not quite dark enough yet, is where we're supposed to be for this time. And there's no rush to get outside. There's
Mhm.
all the time in the world to get there. And so for
Mm.
other people who are in that state of curiosity, wondering about deconstruction, I think the last thing they need is 14 podcasts and let me tell you about what the kingdom of God is like, or
Yeah, yeah,
here's all the information about women in ministry, and here's all this other stuff about homosexuality and all the things. And
yeah,
they'll get there.
yeah,
At least I hope they will.
yeah.
Um, and sometimes, I mean, I had somebody the other day that heard about our church's position on homosexuality, and she was a part of our church for a long time. And her response to me as she left the church was, "I'm going to be praying for your salvation."
Oh,
And it that hurts. Of course, it hurts. But at the same time, I recognize that I can't do anything about that. Like,
mhm,
I need to trust that what God is doing in her life is still a process. And
mhm.
for me to hand her a bunch of books and podcasts about different positions is not helpful, because
It's not. She
she's not
has
in
to
that
be
place.
ready if yeah, and
Yeah.
she may never
No,
be
she may
ready, and the
never.
truth is, and I've also realized this, and this is beautiful, this is so freaking beautiful, is that even if you live your whole life thinking
Mhm.
Jesus died for your sins, and that's why you had to say a prayer, and then now you're going to heaven, and you believe it with all of your heart, and things are great, it doesn't cost you anything on the other
Yeah.
side. You know what I mean? I feel like what it cost me if I were to stay in that was freedom from fear, you know?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you don't realize that that's what's going on and you're happy, it's not like God's gonna be like, "Nope, you had it all wrong, you idiot," you know? No, he's gonna say, "You were doing the best you could with what you knew." Like, he's
Totally.
just not mad at anybody, or she.
Yeah.
God is not mad at anybody, and when you realize that, even the people that make me angry, you
Mhm.
know, like, because they're still doing certain things and making people feel burdened and whatever, everybody's gonna see it at some point. We're all gonna know one day,
We will,
and
and I think we'll all be surprised.
I think we will. I think even
Mhm.
you and me, we
Yep.
we feel good where we're at right now, but I don't know if it's true,
Oh,
and the
totally.
truth is, I feel like none of this like, the main thing is, did we love? Did we
Yeah.
love people around us? Did we serve the people around us? Were we kind?
Yeah.
Did people feel heard and understood and safe in our presence? Did we give
Mm.
them an experience that made them feel valued when they were
Yeah.
around us? That's the stuff that I wanna that's my religion now.
I love that. Yeah, and I am right there with you. I'm right there
Yeah.
with you. And obviously, as a pastor, so much of the undercurrent of the reasons I do what I do is because of Jesus. I am so compelled by who Jesus was when he walked this earth, by who Jesus is in my life, that I just,
Mhm.
everything about what I do is just to fall closer in line with Christ and bring other people into those spaces, because I
Mm.
really do believe that Jesus is the one that sets people free,
Yeah.
that salvation looks like freedom,
Yeah.
um there's nothing, for me, there's nothing better than that. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. And
Yeah.
okay, speaking of Jesus, because
Yeah.
we're coming up on the Christmas season, and you
Yeah.
wrote a book
Yeah. I did.
about the Advent. Can you tell me a little bit about this? Because I'm going to put a link in the show notes
Yeah.
to this.
Oh, yeah.
You also wrote
That'll
one
be
about
awesome.
Lent, but I want to talk about Advent right now, and then maybe we can touch on the Lent one.
Sure. So I wrote guided reflections. So it's kind of like a devotional, but not like not classic Christian pink devotional. I always think of
Yeah.
devotionals as pink with flowers.
Yeah.
I'm very much against that. Um, but anyway, so I wrote this guided reflection every day throughout Advent during COVID,
Mm.
the first year of COVID, when everything was shut down and everything felt really dark, and I wrote them as blog posts, and then I eventually, the next year, I put it into a book form. Um, so there is some stuff about COVID in the book, but I've readapted it to just general feelings of darkness
Mhm.
and wilderness wanderings and all the things that that happen in life, the hardest parts of life, the parts of suffering. Advent is this really beautiful practice that the church has uh, observed for, 1,000 years of preparing our hearts for the birth of Christ. But
Mhm.
it begins with darkness in so many ways. And I don't know about you, but in the church that I grew up in, we didn't really celebrate any of those church calendar things. It was mostly
Mm-mm.
just happy, slappy,
Yeah.
lights everywhere, Christmas carols all the way up until
Cantatas.
Christmas Day, cantatas. I know all of the cantatas. And it's all sweet. I love it. It's
Yeah.
fun, it's
Yeah.
nostalgic. I have nothing
Yeah.
against that. But
Same.
the beauty of Advent is it's recognizing the discomfort of those beginning few days before Christmas, those 30 days before Christmas, where things are dark, things seem bleak. I think of Mary, and she's just this young person, and she's now saying yes to something that she has no idea what that means, and how, we always think like, oh, what an amazing privilege, the joy she probably felt. No,
Mm-mm.
I'm sure she felt fear and apprehension and like, what did I say yes to? And I am so alone and I feel isolated in this space. All those things that I think a lot of people felt, especially during COVID, but what we feel in our everyday lives in general,
Mm.
this sense of where is God and how can I trust God when things feel really dark. And then it leads up to the light. Advent leads us towards Christmas, where we're like, in the life of the church, it's you light another Advent candle every Sunday, in the sense of bringing more light into the darkness until
Oh, yeah.
Christmas Day. You light that Jesus candle and you turn on the lights, and everything is bright and hopeful again, because hope has arrived. Um, and so I kind of lead us through those things. I talk a lot about Zechariah um, and Elizabeth uh, yeah, just different stories. They're all based on scripture, so I usually
Right.
sit in either a passage or a verse, and then create a reflection based on that.
That
They're
sounds
short.
beautiful.
Yeah, they're
Well,
short. You
I
could read them
will put a
short.
link in the show notes for that in
Thanks.
case you wanna pick that up, because
Yeah,
Christmas isn't too far away, and I think there might be some people listening who are deconstructing, who maybe aren't in church right now, but are
yeah,
maybe looking for some sort of new tradition or something they
yeah.
can do with their kids or with their family. Still something to do. It's something you can do
Totally.
that feels, centered on hope and
Yeah,
light, like
yeah.
you said, and also acknowledging the difficult darkness that can happen as well in those
Totally.
times.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
beautiful,
Yeah,
Bethany. Thank you.
thanks. It's called
Yeah,
Stepping into Advent, and then the other one is Stepping into Lent, and it's kinda similar in that sort of a way.
same
So,
kinda thing.
yeah.
That's great. So, that's,
Yeah.
like, around Easter time. So,
Yeah, yeah, 40
very
days
fun.
before Easter.
And you're working on another book, aren't you?
Yeah, I have been for a long time. And actually, it's interesting how you wrote that book Wholehearted and how you wouldn't have written it in the same way now at this point.
Yeah.
I feel
Mhm.
like when I started writing this book quite some time ago, it's a book on adoption.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not the same person as I was when I started writing it like 5 years ago. And I just picked it back up maybe 6 months ago. And I'm recognizing that, yes, there's a lot about adoption in it based on like why Paul would have used language of adoption when talking about what it means to be part of the family of God and what that would
Mhm.
have meant to people back then with Roman understandings of adoption. And um, but really, I've seen that it's more about belonging than anything else.
Mhm.
As an adoptive parent with kids that come from really traumatic situations, we were foster parents. We were able to adopt. Um, there is this sense of needing to belong and not knowing how. And I
Mhm.
think for a lot of people, especially people in the church, if you don't behave in a certain way, if you don't believe the certain things, then
Yeah.
belonging is something that doesn't come as easily. So you feel like you have to kind of like wear a mask and put on the happy face and say the right things and pray the right way and say the right hallelujahs in order to belong. And I think what I've seen with my own children as adoptive kids, I want them to know they belong, regardless how, of what even a family is supposed to look like or can look like. I want
Mhm.
them to know that belonging isn't based on their family of origin or if they are doing the right things or if they, yeah, if any of it, that they
Yeah.
always will belong to our family no matter what. So that's
Mm.
kind of what the book is about. Yeah.
Wow. That sounds great. Well, I can't wait until it's finished.
Thanks.
When it's
Me
done
too.
and it's going to print, you let me know and I'll have you
I
back on and
will.
we'll talk about it because I think that that actually sounds pretty much, I mean, it's a spiritual parallel for sure.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people can connect with just feeling like you don't belong. I mean, right
Yeah.
now, there's a lot of places I don't belong anymore. And they were places where I was a leader, you know,
Yep. Yeah.
and that can be really hard. But then I'm also finding places that I do belong that are
Yeah.
new and exciting and fun. So it's okay. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
There's a certain amount of grief that comes with those
okay.
changes.
Hmm.
And um, I read somewhere somebody said grief isn't terminal. It won't kill you, but it definitely hurts a lot. And that's just a reality
Oh, yeah.
of all these sorts of faith shifts and the loss of families or communities or understandings of who God is in your life. There's grief to that. And I think honoring the journey is honoring the grief that lives in your body, but recognizing that it is not terminal and it will not kill you. Yeah.
It feels like it sometimes, though, doesn't it?
Oh, it sure does. It sure does.
Yeah, I know. I know. Well, Bethany, I honor your journey. I thank you so much for just this really rich and I mean, great conversation. I have enjoyed every single bit of it, just like I knew I would. So, and
Thanks,
I'll make sure
Leslie.
to put some stuff in the show notes if people want to get in contact with you, or if they want to listen to your podcast where
Yeah.
you're with Nate and John doing the "This Is Not Church" podcast, which is super fun. They're really great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if anybody ever wants to, come onto the sermons at all, they're on YouTube.
Oh,
At,
great.
yeah, at Catalyst Church Humboldt. So people can
Okay.
find sermons there if they want. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I'll put a link to that then in the show
Cool.
notes. Thanks,
Awesome.
Bethany. You have an
Thanks,
awesome
Leslie.
day.
You too.